Greetings. Welcome to Dr. Neil's Spiritual Awakening to Non-Duality. This is Dr. Connie Zweig, and I'll be interviewing my husband who lives in spiritual awakening. You may have heard about this or read about it, but you may not know someone who lives it day to day. We'll be exploring how non-duality developed in Dr. Neil as I've observed it over 25 years, and as he directly experiences it every day. Each podcast will explore a different theme. We look forward to you joining us. Greetings. We're back with a new podcast, and today we're going to discuss myths of enlightenment, popular misconceptions that people carry around into your yoga class, into your conversations about meditation, maybe even in your shadow, secret assumptions that you're making that you're not even aware of yourself about spiritual awakening and the evolution of consciousness. So today I'm going to ask Dr. Neil about the myths of enlightenment. So the first myth that seems to be a mischaracterization is that there is an ultimate state of consciousness, that we land somewhere and we stop evolving. Is this accurate?
No, there's no ultimate state of enlightenment. You don't get somewhere and then you're there. It's continuously unfolding and has many dimensions, an infinite amount of dimensions. In fact, I have a sense that if I reach a certain state, the creative states makes another one for me to attain.
Can you say more about that?
Well, for example, first state of non-duality was seeing myself in the objects of visual awareness. And I thought that was the ultimate state. And then later on, I saw myself everywhere. And in other words, I was able to be anywhere in the cosmos with a sense of sight.
Objects near and far.
Objects near and far. And I was that object, and that object was me. And I thought that was the ultimate state. And then I found myself moving to a place where there was a sense of there was a question in my mind, which is what was creating that capacity to be everywhere and be present in every state and identify myself in that state. And I found that there was an emptiness, a sense of non-dual emptiness that was kind of the source. And so it continued, maybe 10 more states after that. And I'm still exploring new states.
I think Almas calls this runaway realization, right? Or endless realization.
Yeah, he wrote a book on this, A.H. Almas, on infinite amounts of potential for realization. Not everybody wants to have multiple realizations. Some people stay focused on one, like the emptiness or the fullness or the capacity of being one with everything. So some people stay focused and deepen it. In other words, they become more and more conscious of that state. But ultimately, there is no one state that one can attain.
Okay, and then let's talk about the myths about this fantasy of an ultimate state of enlightenment. Some of the traits that I hear people talk about, for example, that there's no ego and no shadow in that level of consciousness.
Right, yeah, that's a big myth. So ego is as infinite as any awake state. So one does not get rid of ego. And any attempt to do that is going to actually inhibit your growth as in consciousness. The ego transforms itself. So it it moves from being identified with the body, identified with the personality, identified with the heart, identified with the soul, identified with
Mind.
mind, of course, and identified with emptiness, identified with the divine. In fact, if you think about the way religion talks about God, God is very egotistical in most religions. There's a lot of rules and definitions of where you're supposed to go. And, that's a big ego.
So what I'm hearing you say is that the ego's identity expands and expands. That's your experience.
Uh-huh.
There are other teachers who describe the ego as receding, getting smaller, and ultimately disappearing.
Yeah, so it does do that from the point of view of what it leaves behind. In other words, when one is identified with personality and the heart and the soul, and one then finds emptiness arises, so there's no ego in that emptiness. There's no clear ego in it. There's a source there, but as one grows, so the things that are left behind or one passes through seem like they're like ego. It seems like it's not real anymore. It seems like it's an illusion. It's a concept. It's a creation of the mind. But in truth, it's really continuing to grow, but not on a conscious level.
Okay, and what about the shadow?
Same thing applies to the shadow. There's nobody without a shadow. Human beings, have a shadow aspect to them, no matter what their level of consciousness. In Judaism, the greater your level of attainment, or let's call it enlightenment, the greater your shadow. So it's kind of like you can do more harm if you have more evolution and more consciousness. And
Because you have more power?
because you have more ability and power to do dark things. Now that's a myth, particularly in Eastern philosophies, that you reach a level where you can't do wrong. And many gurus and teachers fall into that hole. And so we're seeing a lot of that these days, where gurus, priests, teachers are doing horrendous things: money, manipulation, sexual involvement with students, power plays. And that's because they don't recognize the shadow part that's coming out of the unconscious needs to be addressed infinitely, as well as being awake, being aware.
And so there's still unconscious material in enlightenment. And I think we've covered that in the podcast about the chakras and the podcast about meeting the shadow on the spiritual path. But now we're saying that in the context of this myth, that it's possible to attain perfection, which means no wrong action, no wrong words. You would never harm someone. You would never harm an animal or the planet in any way, because it's all spontaneous right action, which is what I learned in my early meditation life. Then what we're saying is that that's actually not true.
Yeah, that's a myth. There are many myths that are there to encourage students to become consciously involved with their own development. And that's the purpose of these myths. Like, you will be forever doing the right action. We have a sense of morality. And morality is not the same as enlightenment. It's a separate path. Ken Wilber talks a lot about this, that if you can actually be awake and yet be totally immoral. Immoral, yeah, because you haven't developed morality. And there are a lot of examples that we have in our journey together.
Okay. So, and I remember there was a book that came out called Perfect Health. If only you meditate, your body will become perfect and you'll never get sick.
Right. So karma is totally separate to perfect health. In fact, I'd say that health is inversely related to spiritual development. In other words, you're more likely to get sick or suffer and die younger if you're enlightened or awake. You have some of the levels because you're processing karma, and some of the karma is not personal. In other words, I have personal karma from this lifetime, from previous lifetimes, from being a part of the planet, from being part of the galaxy, and as you unfold your consciousness, so you're taking on more karma. So you're taking on all human beings' karma, and you can't say, no, I'm not going to be one with that person, but I will be one with that person. So it doesn't work that way. You're awake, you're connected with everybody. And that includes the shadow side or the suffering side, the dark side. And what's important is not to get lost in thinking that you're beyond suffering, beyond illness.
Okay, so again, the myth that I was taught was take care of your nervous system, food and rest, and it will be easier to wake up. And then when you wake up, you actually won't have to die because, your body will become immortal, like Babaji.
Right.
So what I'm hearing you say is, as you become unified with more and more, as you experience non-duality with greater and greater number of beings, there's some way in which you're taking on the karma of all of that. Is that what you're saying?
You're taking on the karma because you're one with them. You have empathy and compassion. If you're already growing with that aspect, you have identity with all human beings. So, even the ones you hate. So you can hate as well in being awake in life. You're not separate from that.
You can have negative emotions.
Certainly negative emotions, and you can be battling certain issues. You're not free from conflict. Can you purify your nervous system so that you never end up being sick or suffering? There are many paths, and the path is a way to actually reach a highest level of awakeness. It's not to stay there, and nor is it supposed to be practiced for the whole of your life. These are short practices, so they shouldn't be practiced for more than 5 or 6 years, because they're largely about denying certain aspects of yourself in order to attain other aspects. So,
what's an example of that?
for example, if one lives in a monastery or cave, one does not need an ego. One does not need to be functioning in the world with all its conflicts and issues. And so it's easier to reject the idea of having an ego. But if one lives in the West and one has spouse and children,
Household,
community, one identifies with humanity, one needs an ego to think and function on this level. That doesn't mean that it's permanently part of yourself.
So the ego is not an enemy. I mean, that's kind of a widespread.
It's a construct, and there are many different levels of what we call ego. A lot of people think of ego as any sense of self-identity, but there are identities for the personality, identity for the heart, identity for the soul, identity for the galaxy or the planet, identity with all life. So there are many identities, and these are all different aspects of self.
Okay. So let's move to some myths about death and awakening.
Yeah, death is one of the biggest myths that there is. because I remember my past lifetime, the one before this and the one before that. And there was no death. There was transformation into astral, mental, Buddhic planes, a celestial plane, and some even higher planes. And I came back again. Came back into a body, and there was a definite process of moving from celestial planes and adding sheaths, bodies to myself so that I can become functional in the physical world.
But the myth, I think, is that we only have one lifetime
Right.
to wake up, and then we're either going to go to heaven or hell.
Yes, that's a big myth.
Right.
Because you will keep evolving no matter what. That's my experience. And that's not a idea or a thought or a concept. It's my experience of my own journey through different lifetimes.
And what about the practices, the intention to have a conscious death? Because that's very widespread in the spiritual world.
Right. I think the purpose of that is the same as meditating. In other words, it's good to practice the soul journey through lifetimes. It's good to practice that. So it's good to be awake because it's a certain level that people can aspire to. And at death, one can become a soul, can become that level. So, however, that doesn't mean that you're going to disappear or you're going to be enlightened. It just means you're going to attain a certain level.
So I'm not following. I think the myth is that you lose your level of consciousness when you die.
You don't lose your level. In fact, you go to the highest level that you would experience while alive on the planet. So, so I will go to the highest level that I have experienced in this lifetime. And that may be also in subtle realms, the highest level that I've experienced.
And is that regardless of how you physically die? If you die on drugs, if you die by suicide, if you die, is that independent of how you die?
Yeah. In other words, this sort of idea that one goes to the highest level one has experienced while alive is quite widespread. In Christianity, if you believe in Jesus, so you'll be saved. Buddhism, if you can pass through the borders, you'll reach nirvana. So there's a great deal of mythology about this moving through planes or levels. And that's my experience too, is that people, when they die, will go to a certain level, usually the highest level that they've experienced in their life. In fact, I can see in some of my clients right now, they're indicating to me, talk about me. And then at some point, they'll let go of that level, the highest level they've attained, and merge and melt into being one with everything. Almost like going to sleep and into a happy, blissful state, and then being carried back by the laws of karma back into a physical body. So one does not escape that. Can one not return? It's possible to stay in certainly enlightened states for a long time, but eventually everybody returns.
So for people who want to practice power and other practices for conscious death, what are you saying?
By all means, because it's not about death, it's about the illusion of death. Death is not real. Nobody dies. We all go to another plane. So practice it. It'll help you to grow. But don't believe that it's going to save you from dying or going to save you from going through bardos or different planes of existence. It's not going to save you from that.
Is it going to change the outcome in any way in terms of dying consciously, let's say without morphine or without suicide?
No. It's a magnificent creation that we live in. And some people who are really ill before they die, they go initially to a kind of hospital where there are all angels and devas and beings will help one to actually heal the psychological, physical, what remains.
You mean on the astral plane?
On the etheric plane and the astral plane and the mental plane to some degree as well. So these beings are, that's their purpose, is to help clear away the debris of painful endings. So one doesn't hold on to and one can go for the light and can go for this and the joy and the love.
Okay. So the next section is about getting enlightenment or attaining awakening.
Right. Awakening is grace. So it happens because one practices without intent of any kind of ego development. The ego cannot, well,
Not the ego that gets enlightened.
it's not the ego that gets enlightened. The ego can take you there, can take you closer, but one needs to accept that there's many lifetimes before one wakes up. I mean, I remember being awake my last lifetime, and I went to heavenly realm that was totally blissful, without conflict, but it was boring after a while.
Yeah, but what I'm trying to get at here is not that. It's more about striving and pushing, trying, efforting to awaken in the same way we might like work out at the gym to have a strong body.
Yeah, it's possible to have effort. And like, for example, in Zen Buddhist, it's possible to effort oneself into a moment of awakeness. But one cannot stay there through efforting, because the ego gets caught in that process and one identifies with the small ego. And then
I did it.
I am enlightened. Not enlightenment is everywhere.
And awakening doesn't happen in the mind. So it's not the minds, it's not understanding concepts.
True.
So the myth there is that you can use insight to wake up.
Yes, you can't logically figure out how to be awake. One has to practice the techniques that you have. Another illusion is that you need a guru to wake up. So that's not my experience. Certainly, I have many teachers and gurus, but I wouldn't say I needed any of them to wake up. So that's an illusion, and it's an illusion perpetuated by priests and rabbis.
The guru industrial complex.
Yeah, right.
But people do need guides at some stages of their life. And people do need, like, for example, you, when we were exploring the knower, you needed a more evolved person to tell you what that really was, that was the source of all knowledge.
Yes,
You needed that guidance.
Right. In fact, the story of gurus are that ultimately they have to wake their students up. They have to wake them up, and students always leave the guru once they're awake because they don't need the guru anymore. They don't need. So I remember a story one of my friends told me about meeting with a Buddhist monk who had a lineage, and the lineage did not have somebody to follow the Buddhist monk. And he said, I can't find somebody to take over because every time they get close and they wake up, they leave because they don't need the path anymore. They're beyond the path.
So what are you saying, that teachers have a vested interest in their students remaining ignorant?
Yes.
Really?
A good example is transcendental meditation. I went to the great hall that they have circular and looked to find awakened people, and there was none. Amongst the 500 people there who'd been meditating, many of them for 40 years, there was none who were actually had reached a decent level of awakeness. because they were still trapped in the idea that the guru has enlightenment and that they don't.
So it seems to me some people do need teachers at some stages. They need guides. You had NEAT early on. We made a podcast about that and the origins of your spiritual life. And other people are more devotionally oriented and they need someone to adore and be devoted to for some period of time. And a spiritual teacher, a clergy person can hold that projection. There are risks in that, but that's, that works for some people for a certain period of time. So what I'm hearing you say is the myth is that you absolutely need to have a guru.
Correct.
And so what you're saying is,
Guru can be very helpful in really teach you certain things along the path, can wake you up on certain levels. It's all possible. But ultimately, it's not essential. And in fact, it can be more detrimental at certain stages than helpful.
okay, so I think we don't want to generalize. We want to kind of discriminate here. And so for some people listening to this, having a teacher can be helpful.
Can be.
And for other people, it's time to separate from your teacher.
And a good teacher will let you go when it's the right time. In other words, they'll send you away. And this is a great tradition. Just go on your own journey and come back once you've found some part of yourself.
Or don't come back.
Or don't come back because...
Or send you out to teach. Like Papaji sent out all these people to teach.
Right. And many of them have reached an awake level and interpret that as permanent.
Okay, so to sum up here, we hope this is helpful for you. We explored some of the popular myths and misunderstandings that don't fit Dr. Neal's path, his own experience of awakening to non-duality.
Yes, and you may have a totally different experience because everybody has their own journey. And doesn't mean you should follow mine or anybody else's.
Okay, thank you. We'll see you next time. Thanks for tuning in today. If you found our discussion insightful, there's a good chance your friends will too. And we'd love it if you could take a moment to share this episode with a friend who you believe would appreciate it. Help us spread the word and reach more people. And follow us on any platform. Turn on your episode notifications so you never miss new content. Thanks for being part of our podcasting journey.